Joining us now to talk more about the upheaval in Egypt and how the uncertainty in the region might affect world oil prices is Carl Larry. He is the president of Oil Outlooks and Opinions. He's joining us live from Houston. Thanks so much for being with us, Carl. Let's start with the biggest consideration, which, as we just mentioned, is the prospect of a disruption to the Suez Canal. Of course, the threat of violence, the big driver of these jitters, one would imagine. Is that pretty much on target?
Yeah, it is, and here's the issue. It's not about if Morsi is in control or if the new opposition leader is in control. It's the issue that there's two factions here that are warring. They're having issues with each other, and that's what really is the concern about the Suez Canal. They're not going to stop the Suez Canal or block it, but if there's violence around it, if there's disruption around it, that's going to cause people to avoid it and try some other routes.
So, Carl, how long do you think this is going to be playing with the markets? I mean, this looks like it could go on for an extended period of time. The uncertainty.
It can, yeah, it definitely can. Yes, and I think that's the issue. We're going to have to wait until the elections again. We're going to have to wait and see how that works out, and we're going to see how, once they do have the elections, how these two different factions are going to deal with each other then. Of course, we have Syria still on the back burner too. So how this ends up in Egypt could have an effect on how things will turn out in Syria. So there's a lot of Middle East tension that's going to stay here for a while.
Well, Carl, let's talk about that. Egypt is not one of the largest oil-producing countries in the world, but there is unrest, uncertainty in that part of the world. Is that what's giving pause to a lot of these folks?
It is, and I'll tell you what, Mike, that's a very good point, because as we've seen today, what's going on right now, you're seeing oil prices in America really jumping, and that's because we've been supplying our own oil. We haven't really relied a lot on foreign oil, so the more that foreign oil gets politically motivated here, or geopolitical tensions, the more the U.S. oil really starts to spike. So it's good that we're not bringing as many imports in, but it's hard now because we're become much more sensitive to geopolitical shock.
So frame it for the U.S. consumer and for folks watching in our international community. How much of this should they be concerned about?
Well, it's a matter of timing. The longer it goes on, the more tension that goes, the higher these prices are going to keep going. We need to see something settled, and that's the point here. And that's not going to happen until we see an election, until we see the results after the election, until we see some kind of settlement in the area altogether. So it could be 6 months down the road, and the longer it takes, the higher these prices are going to go, whether it's for the U.S. or whether it's for imports for oil into China.
And there's been concern about Iran. You brought up Syria. We're talking about Egypt here. What about Saudi Arabia? They've seen revolutions all around them. If unrest were to spread there, how large a concern would that be?
Well, it's a very big concern. I mean, there's only one country in the world that has spare capacity of oil, and that's Saudi Arabia. If the unrest started there, if we saw any kind of geopolitical tensions coming from that area, we're talking about $150 oil within a blink of an eye. That's our lifeline to spare capacity. Not so much what we need right now because demand seems to be tapering off or at least settling down. But if that area is affected, then those prices will jump fast.
And Carl, you're one of these guys who analyzes this, who watches this. What are you looking for in the next few months?
Well, I think $100 oil is here to stay. Whether we're talking about Brent or we're talking about oil here in the U.S. or globally, we're just going to look at $100 oil as our baseline. I think what we're going to look for going to the upside, though, is going to be somewhat a little bit hard to keep a finger on. We're looking at maybe 110. 120 if things get tight, and obviously 150 if we see the Middle East area really start to rise.
Well, Carl Larry joining us from Houston. I suspect we'll be talking to you again in the future. This is a story that's going to be on the front burner for a while. Thanks so much for joining us.